just squat. The hip thrust is one of the most popular posterior chain exercises there is. For a home gym, having a standalone hip thruster machine probably doesn't make sense for most people, but today I'm gonna walk through the best hip thruster machines that are plate loaded, rack attached, and standalone, as well as pads that you use. I have tested and reviewed many that are on the market, from the really expensive ones that you find in commercial gyms like the Booty Builders, Atlantises of the world, and Nautiluses, all the way down to some of the really cheap models and just general pads or rack attachments that you can find to give you which ones are the best. So let's get into the review. Hey guys, it's Coop from Garage Gym Reviews. Today I'm reviewing the best hip thrusters. For posterior chain work, a hip thruster is really popular. I'm not going to dive into whether it's the ideal exercise or not. There's people that know that better than me biomechanically, and there's arguments on both sides. I've heard people like Mike Israetel say it's not the best exercise. Then I've heard people like Paul Carter that say it's a perfectly fine, as well as Bret Contras say it's a perfectly fine exercise. I do hip thrusters in my training, and the one that I have in my garage, I'll talk about in a little bit, but there are many ways to accomplish the movement. And I think for a home gym, the best way to do that is probably with a rack attachment. So I'm going to first go through some of the rack attachments, because most of you will already have a squat rack. If you don't, you should probably buy a squat rack before you buy a hip thruster machine. But there's many squat rack attachments today that honestly are very cheap, take up very little space, and can be just or as close to as effective as many of the plate loaded, very expensive, a lot of floor space taking up machines that you find in commercial gyms. Okay, so if you're gonna do hip thrusters, you're probably gonna need a barbell of some sort. You can use bands, you can also use sandbags, and there's other unique ways, like there's a company that makes one that loads dumbbells on it. The problem is you can't load as heavy as you really need to. If you've ever done hip thrusters, you probably realize pretty quickly that you can load a lot of weight. Even if you're not as strong in, say, the deadlift or squat, there are some people that the movement is made in such a way that you can lift a lot of freaking weight, which is really fun. It's one reason I think a lot of people like to do it, is because it's very confidence building. You can just lift a ton. But if you really want to do effective hip thrusting, I think you need to have a barbell of some sort. So there's many barbells that are made just standard barbells, but also barbells made for hip thrusting. I don't think you need one made for hip thrusting. One thing I'd say, for comfortability, I find like an axle bar, because of its thicker diameter, often feels more comfortable than just the standard Olympic bar. The thicker diameter feels better. But no matter what bar you use, you're going to want to use some sort of pad, because that's really what prevents people from going heavier, is because it's just more uncomfortable. There's a few different options that are rack attached or that are barbell based. One of them I think that's really popular and that's really cheap, and that is cheaper than many on the market, is the AbMat pivot pad. It is very similar to many of their other AbMat products in that it's using like their molded foam, and then it's got this really solid core. What's unique about it is you don't have to buy any other attachment. You just attach it to a barbell. What I like about it though, versus many others that are on the market, is the fact that it actually pivots. Why it's called a pivot pad. It was developed by Kelly Starrett from Supple Leopard. The idea is basically you put your barbell on the rack, you attach the pivot pad to it, you then have a barbell that you roll over your hips. They actually have a HTP pad. If I'm doing just a barbell hip thrust, that's the pad that I use. There's upsides and downsides. One of the downsides is it's just a standard square pad, and so the barbell can move off of it. I think it's a decent design. It's one that I see a lot of people use. Also, another option is like a squat bar pad. The squat bar pads that then Velcro around, you just got to get one that's pretty high density if you're going heavy, because it will either tear the actual pad or it'll just be so like it'll be so low density that it's very uncomfortable. But I like the pivot pad because of the price, and also because it's just modular, it doesn't take up any space. And a lot of people already have a squat rack to use. A version that I think is actually superior to that is the BC Strength Thruster Pad Bar. So this is designed to mimic one of their machines, the Thruster 3.0, which we actually have back here. The idea is basically it's an axle bar with a pad attached to it that rotates. So it's a separate bar. You use it just for hip thrusting. I'm sure you could come come up with some other exercise you could do for it, but that's really what you use it for. You place it in a rack. It's 50 inches long, so it's going to work on just about any rack, even the wide boys like the Rogue Monster racks. You put it in the J-cups, and then you have a pad that pivots. I really like it. I actually like it better than the pivot pad from Abnat if you have the space available, and the space is not a lot. You basically just need an upright bar holder, and then you can stick it in there. But I like it better because the padding on it is much grippier. The problem with the pivot pad from Abnat is it's really slick, so you can end up sliding off. But you have a dedicated bar that I just think rotates and is very comfortable and works really well. For a lot of you, honestly, that's probably what I'd recommend, either that one or the pivot pad because of the price. Then one that has gained more popularity, I think truly kind of sucks, is the Rogue Monster hip thrust pad. I have this. When I first got it, I was like, this is a cool idea. I think I'm gonna like it. Just over time, you realize the design, it just leaves a lot to be desired. I wouldn't actually be surprised if they either updated it or got rid of it, because there's another option that I'm going to talk about that they've come out with. But the hip thrust pad, the reason it's not as good as I think it could be, in theory, it makes sense, but the pad is a square pad. So you're basically putting your back up against the corner of a square pad. I don't know why they came up with that design. It also doesn't rotate. It's also very annoying to place on the rack. It's heavy. There are a lot of things that it doesn't have going for it, so I don't recommend it. It's $300. I have it in my garage and it just sits there. But they've come out with what I think is basically their 2.0 version that I freaking love. That is the Rogue multi-use rack roller. This was actually designed by a guy named Tim. He's actually at Pro Tim on Instagram. He is like the Rogue Rhino GOAT. He's come up with more exercises on the Rogue Rhino, and one of the things that he came up with was this roller that mounted on spotter arms so you could use it for all sorts of things with your Rhino. Well, he collaborated with Rogue to make it. It took years to come out, but I'm so glad it came out because it is perfect. There's like hardly anything I'd change about it, which is very rare. It rotates, it's lightweight, yet strong enough. I say lightweight, it's lightweight for a Rogue product. It's still like 33 pounds, but it rotates really well. It's strong, it's great for hip thrusts. Works extremely well because it rotates, it's also round. I love it for hip thrusts, but it can also do so much more, which for something that you're gonna spend $325 on, you probably want it to do more than just one movement. So for a lot of you, if you have a Rogue rack with that width and you want to spend some money, that's the one I'd recommend. Now, if you're looking for like a pad to sit on you, I mentioned the Abnat HTP pad. Another one is an AirX balance pad. That's another one that works really well. It's this really unique foam. It's like they made it in some Russian lab. It's really like, or got it out of space. It's like, where does this stuff come from? It's really nice, very, very squishy, but also like strong. That's one that I like to place in my hips if I'm using a bar. Then to standalone machines, but still using a barbell. This is really kind of like the first hip thrusters that came out. Bret Contras partnered with Sorenex. Bret Contras, by far the glute guy. He's the one who's put all the effort, or most of the effort, into pushing hip thrusters into the market. And now every gym that you find, you see people doing hip thrusters. If you want to have like a source for that, it's that guy. So he actually makes a lot of products through BC Strength, Bret Contras Strength, BC Strength, and a lot of them are, or most of them, almost all of them, are glute building focused. They're hip thrusting focused, which makes sense. But his first machine, I'm pretty sure he partnered with Sorenex. Well, I don't know what happened there, but now he makes a similar design over at BC Strength. They're imported, they're not made in the USA, but they're actually really well done. One is the Thruster 3.0. You still use a barbell, which by the way, they sell like this axle knurled bar. They call it a hip thruster bar, but it's actually pretty nice, good size. It's essentially an axle bar, but they also sell these bigger plates that take the bar off the ground a little bit more than your standard plate, which is a cool idea. But the Thruster 3.0 is $500 if you want a rotating pad on there other than just the circular pad that doesn't rotate. It's another like $150. They're both nice. I like the design. The problem is you're still using a barbell. You have one thing that really does one thing well. It's like this taking up a lot of real estate to do one thing, and you could just use it in a rack. If you've already got a squat rack, it makes way more sense. But if you're really dedicated to the thruster life, you may just want a standalone machine. And so this is actually a really good option. It's It's been copied like so many times over. One thing that's really nice about it is it's adjustable in height, so you can adjust the pad up and down. You can use it for Bulgarian split squats and things like that too. And then if you have the rotating pad, I think it's much better than the circular pad. One thing that you can do with this that sometimes racks are a little bit more difficult is you can use bands. Now, personally, I don't love using bands for hip thrusts. I want to go heavier. Also, I want the most amount of tension at the stretch portion of the movement. Bands do the opposite. So if you're trying to grow the glutes, honestly, it's superior to do what the opposite of a band would be. So basically the most tension at the stretch portion, which would be the bottom portion, the least at your concentric, according to research. So because of that, I wouldn't use bands a lot. But if you're wanting to get into hip thrusting or don't want to use a lot of weight or want something that's easy to set up, this allows you to do that. Now, if you're looking for like basically a cheaper option, there is an option we have here from RitFit, like half the price and it's half as good. You get what you pay for. It's not great. The one that we've got, the pad doesn't rotate. It doesn't adjust in size. It's actually an oversized pad and feels pretty comfortable. But the problem is the actual rubber mats, you're basically gonna have to throw away because they slide every time you use them, which is super annoying. My recommendation, if you want this style, just go with BC Strength. If you want a lighter version, I'm just gonna mention it. They do have the light version, L-I-T-E, light version. It's okay, it's half the price too, but also can't do nearly the weight and it doesn't adjust. Then if you want something that also does hamstring work, basically a GHR that's on the floor, Titan makes one. They say it's designed for hip thrusting and it can work for it. I'd really only recommend it if you really want the GHR portion. But honestly, one thing that I'd recommend for a lot of you that fits in this realm, isn't designed just for hip thrusts, but can do like 20 other things, Freak Athlete Hyper Pro. I mean, honestly, the Bulgarian split squat / hip thrust attachment that's on that is gonna be good enough and have a good enough experience that's gonna feel very similar in use as this standalone like Thruster 3.0, and you can do way more. So for a lot of you, if you're looking for something that doesn't just do one thing, it's a jack of all trades, right? So some of the things aren't gonna be as good as others, and the hip thrust is a portion of that. The Thruster 3.0 for just hip thrust is gonna be superior, but it's not that much superior. So I'd recommend the Hyper Pro. Then if you're like, Coop, my glutes are the most important thing in my life. I need a standalone hip thrust machine, plate loaded, stack. I just love doing the thrusts for the hips. These are what I'd recommend. My top pick is definitely the Nautilus Glute Drive. The reason being, it is extremely comfortable. It starts you at the top of the rep. You can go very heavy. The angle that your feet are on is really well done. The pad that basically crosses over your hips feels very comfortable if you want it to be more comfortable, because sometimes when you go really heavy, it can dig in. You want to wrap a towel around it, but man, it feels so good. There's a reason it's been copied by just about everybody, but it's also very expensive. So if you're looking for like a budget version of that, because it's been copied again by so many different people, you can go with the copies. One of those copies is the Bells of Steel hip thruster. It does pretty much 90% of the same thing. They've actually upgraded it. There's some new components that we don't have that are going to make it even better than it is now. One thing that you got to realize is it's about half the price, actually less than half the price. The quality is also, I wouldn't say quite half as good, but it's definitely less. One of the components that is definitely not as good is the actual belt. The belt is just, it's okay. It's just going to dig in. It's pretty cheap. Over time, I could see it wearing quite a bit, but I'm hoping they actually offer an upgrade to that, because that would make this machine much better. And in use, it feels, if you close your eyes, very similar to the Nautilus Glute Drive. Now, one option that is a bit unique that may be worth looking at is the Gronk standing hip thruster. This is a pretty cool idea. Basically, they copied Booty Builder. Booty Builder is the company for hip thrust machines. They're the ones who, I think, beyond Nautilus, they've like pushed the market really far for commercial machines. If you go to any commercial facility and they have a hip thrust machine, it's either going to be a Nautilus Glute Drive, an Atlantis, or a Booty Builder. Most of the time, not saying that there's not other companies that make them, but those are the three most popular. And I would say Booty Builder is probably one of the most popular now. The Booty Builder standing hip thruster is designed really for beginners. It's designed basically to get people introed into the thing because you can't go crazy heavy. And I'd say the Gronk works just as well for way cheaper than the Booty Builder version. In fact, the Booty Builder version you can't even buy online. You have to go through a contact form, which typically tells you if you have to do that, you're about to pay out the butthole. So I would highly recommend just going, if you want a standing hip thruster, going with the Gronk standing hip thruster. You just got to understand max weight load is like 330 pounds, which is going to be a little light for some people. Also, the movement, it just feels different than a typical hip thruster. I will say though, by far the most comfortable way to hip thrust. So if for some reason you just like can't stand hip thrusting, you really want to do the movement, but it's very uncomfortable, definitely the Gronk like seated standing hip thruster is the most comfortable. Beyond that, you're really getting into commercial machines and very expensive commercial machines. If you're like, I just want the best of the best, I don't care about the cost or the space, your booty builders like your V8 and your Platinum V4, those are very good machines. One plate loaded, one is stacked. You'll find those in very high-end gyms. They're very nice. Predator Strength makes a hip thrust machine that's pretty nice too with a lot of modularity. I used an Atlantis one when I was out in Sweden that felt really nice with the pad, and the pad like comes over. But man, there are so many on the expensive end. On the budget end, I will say most of the machines that I've used, they're just not great. Like we've got a GMWD. Is that the brand? GMWD? What does that even stand for? GMWD. Anybody got an idea? Get more work done? Maybe that's that. I don't know. Probably never find out. But GMWD, they make one. I noticed it's pretty popular online. Like it's just sold in a lot of places. The problem is it's on this like fixed path and the barbell or the pad is not self-aligning. So you're like, it just feels off. It's just a huge machine. I don't recommend it. It's cheap, but I think you can get much better work done using something like a pivot pad from AbMat or the BC Strength Thruster Bar. That goes into the rack. Okay, mystery solved. GMWD. Put in the comments a guess of what you think it is. Guarantee nobody's guessing this. Glowing movements, wild dreams. If that doesn't make you want to buy a hip thrust machine, I don't know what is. One other I want to mention is the Signature Fitness, basically copycat of the Nautilus glute drive, which is also very similar to the Bells of Steel. We have one, but it didn't come with the plate posts. So it's sitting here, haven't tested it other than without the plate posts. I will say, feels very similar to the Bells of Steel and it's much cheaper. So if you're like, you want a budget version of the budget version, an ultra budget version, this is an option. It's just, you may not get plate posts with it. So there's your options for hip thrusters. There are others that are out there, but these are the ones that I think you should look at. If there's others that you'd recommend, let me know in the comments. I'd love to try them. These are the ones that we've tested and compared. If you have any other questions on hip thrusters, let me know in the comments as well. This is Mike from Garage Reviews. I'll see you next time. Peace.